so tilted and it's so out of whack that it's more than entirely possible to go to Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, and not hear one good thing about a conservative idea for more than 10 minutes in 4 years. It's more than entirely possible.
Milton Friedman is you know, I understand, but his books are still in classes that are introductory.
What is the most read book in college today? Number one.
I have no idea.
Communist Manifesto. The Communist Manifesto. It is. You can laugh. It's documented by the Council of Higher Education.
I wish more people read it and understood it then. I don't know.
I mean, I think it's contributed to the death of 100 million people in the last 100 years, but...
this narrative. Okay. So, before we started, we wanted to talk about how you falsely equate democratic socialism into communism, but I guess if you want to go there, we can.
If we want to talk about the failures of Venezuela, Argentina, Brazil,
I love
Cuba, everywhere Marxism has been tried, then
imperialist efforts of the United States brought about all around the world. Let's not even talk about that. And then let's falsely equate democratic socialism, which partially exists. Socialist constructs are existing in this government that you love.
The most inefficient, you mean the VA that kills veterans? Medicare that
kills veterans.
The postal service that can't even get mail on time. Our government that's $20 trillion in debt. Everything government is more like socialist is bankrupt,
police departments, fire departments, roads. I don't understand.
Wait, all those things are hyper-localized, and everything I attacked, you send your money to Washington, D.C., you go to the VA, and 60 cents on the dollar goes to administrative overhead, not actually helping our veterans that died in the line of fire.
You know how our government is
so government is so inefficient, government is broke, but more government will help.
Can I dig us out of this rabbit hole real fast? I'm going to dig us out of this.
Hey guys, today's a great day to stop being a Republican, or at least stop watching Fox News, especially when your dad's favorite propaganda outlet's out here defending internment camps for children, because why the hell not?
Kids are being separated from their parents and temporarily housed in what are essentially summer camps.
What else could we do? These are summer camps, guys. Their children are forcibly removed from their parents with no actionable plan on what to do with them. And these cries will fall on deaf ears as long as you have one side claiming that the facilities are just fine.
Some have referred to them as cages, but keep in mind, this is a great big warehouse facility where they built walls out of chain link fences.
You really have to look at your life's decisions when you find yourself arguing that a chain link fence is justifiable in the existence of a children's concentration camp. And also, here's Tucker arguing about how no one actually cares about families, so this separation of families is totally fine.
You think any of these people really care about family separation? If they did, they'd be worried about the collapse of the American family, which is measurable and real.
Wait, what?
But they're not worried about that. In fact, they welcome that collapse because strong families are an impediment to their political power.
I'm sorry, that's crazy. Have you ever had one of those arguments where halfway through you realize that you're in too deep and you're actually wrong, but you're no longer arguing for things you believe in, but rather just trying to get one over on the other person?
Right-wingers online love to pitch themselves as victims, saying that Twitter is censoring them, YouTube is censoring them, GoFundMe and crowdsourcing platforms are censoring them, but above all, Facebook is definitely censoring them. And we recently had Diamond and Silk, two pro-Trump women before Congress, talking about how their page had been shut down, which of course it hadn't, that their reach had been cut, which of course it hadn't. We have all the actual data on these things, but they've been saying it, and they've been saying it for years, and unfortunately, their whining, as it so often does, has worked. Axios reported on May 2nd that Facebook is going to be bringing on lobbyist and former Arizona Republican Senator John Kyle to advise the company regarding claims of conservative bias on its platform. The effort will not include any liberals. Additionally, Facebook executives will be receiving advice from the conservative think tank Heritage Foundation on the supposed anti-conservative bias. So they are not biased against conservatives. All of the data shows it. But they're going to bring all of these conservative individuals and think tanks in, and what do you think the outcome of that will be? It will be bias, but not against conservatives. If you are actually neutral, or at least screwing over everyone equally, and then you bring in a bunch of conservatives, the only outcome is moving against liberals.
So I often defend the social media platforms. And I always give the caveat that, look, these guys are our partners too. Let's keep it real. We're on Google, we're on YouTube and Facebook, etc. I'm not going to defend Facebook on this. And they have a really hard job. You know, they get accused of having a liberal bias. They bring in conservatives to help them figure out what the truth is, and they're like, oh, these guys, that's messed up. We can't do that. All right, fine. We can't use humans, so we'll go to an algorithm. They use an algorithm, and then fake news pops up, and then they get criticized for fake news, and they're like, oh, right. So that's the background, and that's as much of a defense as I'll give them. Having said that, no, you're buying into the oldest trick in the book, and you are actually very much pro-conservative. I know that might blow your mind, and Zuckerberg says that Silicon Valley is, quote, extremely left-leaning place. No, it's not. Let's be clear about that. You've got to separate out the two sides, social issues and economic issues. On social issues, I agree. Silicon Valley is liberal. They don't hate black people because they're black. They don't hate gay people just because they're gay. And so, yes, that is true. And I know that drives a lot of conservatives crazy. So they might say, no. Blacks and Latinos, we don't hate them. You're being super unfair. I mean, Latinos shouldn't come into the country. They're dirty and they're bringing in crime, et cetera. And Obama was not really an American, and et cetera. But no, you're being unfair. And gay people shouldn't have the same rights as straight people. But what do you mean we hate? So yes, Silicon Valley does not agree with your bigotry. Okay, good. And you shouldn't. You shouldn't be balanced on that. That's insanity, right? Now, on economic issues, no, Silicon Valley is very conservative. Most of the companies don't even pay their taxes. Yes, they find legal ways to do that, giant loopholes. They go over to the Netherlands, they go to Ireland, they go to the Cayman Islands, and they push for tax cuts. So saying, oh, golly gee, we're all liberals. No, you're not. When it comes to economic issues, you're not remotely liberal.
Can, and in some instances must, protect gay persons and couples in the exercise of their civil rights. But religious and philosophical objections to same-sex marriage are protected views and in some instances protected forms of expression. The law must be applied in a manner neutral toward religion. And so the majority ruling essentially said there wasn't really a neutral reaction or treatment toward the religion. It was too hostile toward the religion.
Okay, but
I know
that also doesn't make any sense. Look, it's a tough case. It really is, and so I'm not saying in a knee-jerk way the liberal position is the correct one, because I take the Constitution very seriously, and we cannot prohibit the free exercise of religion. That's in the First Amendment, and very important and very clear. So the problem is, a lot of people have sincerely held religious beliefs that would discriminate against others. So now we can't allow the discrimination. That's also in the Constitution. So I don't blame the Supreme Court for punting in a sense, because it's nearly impossible to thread that needle. But they have got to make a decision, and this wasn't it. This is just saying, oh, we're going to rule on the Colorado case, but don't let it apply to anything else. Well, then everybody else is still in a state of flux and confusion as to what laws they can pass and enforce. So let me be clear about the sincerely held religious beliefs, and I think this baker in particular, he is sincere. So he also does not allow he does not bake cakes that have alcohol in it because of his beliefs, or bake cakes related to Halloween, and he closes his shop on Sunday. So he's definitely sincere, okay? And I don't even think that this is a case where a guy just hates gay people, wants to use it as an excuse, his religion as an excuse, which happens often, but not in this case, because the guy also hates Halloween. Okay, so he's really believes it, whether you agree with him or not. And it's important to protect those beliefs. But it also has slavery in the Bible and in almost all the religious texts. So that was also a sincerely held religious belief in America that blacks were inferior. And there's a whole story about how one particular bad guy in the Bible was darker complexion, and that's why it was okay to, and their slavery is clearly allowed in the Bible, and so that's why it was okay to enslave black people. That was a sincerely held religious belief by a majority of the country in America. So, and that's what led to slavery. So now Colorado talked about that, and then Kennedy and the other justices were like, how dare you talk about that? You're discriminating against religion. But wait a minute, that was true though.
It was true. So that's where I have an issue, because I agree that elected officials, the government cannot be, hostile to religion, right? That is unconstitutional. I agree with that. But in this case, I feel like it was so subjective because the arguments that were made in the lower courts in favor of the gay couple, right? They mentioned interracial marriage and things like that, and how you can't discriminate based on your religion against interracial married couples. Okay, but that is a fact. So how do you make those arguments without coming off hostile to a particular religion?
And that's exactly my point. Now, it's easy for me to say this because I'm agnostic. I don't believe in any other religions. But your religion, whether you're, by the way, Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, is hostile to gay people. It is.
That's right.
Now, it's also hostile to shrimp eaters, but you ignore that part, right? And look, the Mormon Church did not allow for black clergy and actively discriminated against black Americans until 1978. And that was a sincerely held religious belief. They thought that black people were not the same as white people according to their religion. Now, conveniently, they happened to change their religion because they wanted to get along with the rest of the country. But that was a sincerely held religious belief. So were we supposed to say, that's it, separate water fountains in Utah, separate schools in Utah?
There's a newly released report by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding that says that Muslims are internalizing Islamophobia and that the media is to blame. The study found that Muslims are more likely than members of other faiths to agree with the sentiment that their community is more, quote, prone to negative behavior than other people. Let's take a look at one of these graphics. So there you can see the ISPU's third annual American Muslim poll surveyed Muslims, Jews, Catholics, Protestants, white evangelicals, and those who are non-affiliated and compared attitudes across the groups. What you're looking at now was in response to, I believe my faith community is more prone to negative behavior than other faith communities. So you can see an overwhelming 30% coming from the Muslim respondents to the survey. If you need a little bit of a brush up on what is internalized racism, here you go. Internalizing racism involves ingesting, often subconsciously, acceptance of the dominant society's stereotypes of one's ethnic group. What is the takeaway from this study? The ISPU director of research says, quote, it's the combination of disproportionate media coverage and Muslims being much more focused on that kind of media coverage that explains the fact that Muslims themselves have internalized this very stereotype of being prone to violence. The report also found that those who scored higher on the Islamophobia index were associated with greater support for President Donald Trump's travel bans and increased surveillance of American mosques. So a pretty startling research. Were either of you surprised that this was coming out?
So I actually have a report on this that I am in the middle of writing.
All right.
For Pop Culture Collaborative. It looks at over 100 years of representation of Muslims on TV and film. And it lines up exactly with the findings of the study, which is that there aren't available, quote unquote, positive or authentic full images of Muslims on television. Things are shifting now, but what we have had to ingest through political campaign ads, through primetime news, through movies like American Sniper or Argo was the degradation of our faith and of our communities. Mm-hmm. So it's hard not to. And I'll give you an anecdote, or I have many anecdotes, but I run a lot of workshops nationally around the representation of Arabs and Muslims on television and film. And I do a quick little activity in the beginning where I ask people to think about the images that they see or the things that come to mind when they hear the word terrorist, the things that come to mind when they hear the word Muslim, and the things that come to mind when they hear Arab. And usually what's consistent is that all the same adjectives are used for all three categories. And so I've had Muslims tell me afterwards, is it weird that I couldn't think of anything that wasn't terrorist-like for Muslim? Mm-hmm. And I was like, it's not, because think about the images that you're constantly being exposed to. And yes, you might have family structures and communities that are counter to what you're seeing, but it's so hard to displace the imagery around you. And the thing that also was really striking is The Intercept did the story, and shout out to Murtaza, who is an amazing reporter there. And they found that there was disproportionate coverage of violence perpetrated by Muslims 7 times on television, 7 times more, and that Muslims received 4 times longer sentencing for the same crimes as non-Muslims.